Two of India's biggest names in education are now circling what was once the world's most celebrated Edtech unicorn. That's right, Byju's parent company, Think and Learn Pvt Ltd or TLPL is now at the center of a high-stakes insolvency battle, and the drama is unfolding inside the National Company Law Tribunal or the NCLT. On one side, you have the Manipal Group led by long-time education heavyweight Ranjan. On the other hand, you have upGrad, chaired by industry veteran and media entrepreneur Ronnie Screwvala. Both have officially filed expressions of interest or EOIs to acquire some or all of Byju's assets. Before we get into how this fight might play out, let's break down the details first. An expression of interest or EOI is simply a formal way of saying we'd like to bid and here's who we are. It's not a final bid. It's the first knock on the door. Manipal and upGrad have both submitted theirs. Now they're waiting to see if creditors allow them into the room where the real decisions get made. And that room is the Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process or CIRP. Now, TLPL's insolvency is massive, involving nearly 1,780 creditors. So any bid for Byju's assets must run a tight, rule-bound process under India's Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It's long, it's technical, and it is almost entirely controlled by the people to whom the company owes money. Now, this is where the story becomes a very different one from the Byju's we remember in its heyday. Remember that peak valuation? $22 billion in the year 2022. At the time, TLPL had raised more than $4 billion from some of the biggest global investors you can think of. Tiger Global, General Atlantic, Sequoia India, Silver Lake, B Capital, even the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And the company spent aggressively, really aggressively, on acquisitions. Akash Educational Services, White Hat Junior, Epic, Great Learning, and the list just went on. More than 20 deals overall. But those big spends were followed by big problems. Audited financials were delayed. Deloitte resigned as the statutory auditor, calling out pending accounts. There were questions around how the company recognized revenue and long tenure courses being missold. On top of that, investors stopped putting in money, and the company's growth also slowed down. Cash flow pressure mounted. Then came the deal that turned everything upside down. The default on a $1.2 billion term loan B. That triggered a legal fight with the lenders represented by GLAS Trust Company. And today, those very lenders are the ones essentially in charge of deciding whether Manipal or upGrad will be the next owner of Byju's. So now that Manipal and upGrad are in the race, what happens next? Under CIRP, creditors first set eligibility criteria for who can actually bid. Once a bidder meets those rules, they are allowed to move forward. Then comes the next step, the information memorandum. This is basically a detailed account laying out the company's finances, assets, liabilities, and the mess that's left to clean up. The bidders are also given access to a virtual data room where they can pore over legal, financial, and operational documents. This is where they decide how much the company is actually worth and how much trouble they might be buying. After due diligence, eligible bidders submit binding confidential resolution plans. These plans must comply with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. For example, they must cover the costs of the insolvency process, and they must pay operational creditors at least their liquidation value. These rules are strict, and they're meant to ensure that bidders don't just undercut the weakest creditors to get a cheaper deal. Once the plans are in, the real power shifts to the Committee of Creditors or COC. These lenders vote on which plan is best, and this decision is based on what experts call their quote-unquote commercial wisdom. That includes things like how much cash the bidder is offering upfront, how feasible the plan is, how reliable or financially strong the bidder is, how well they've treated stakeholders in past acquisitions, and even the bidder's long-term credibility. But the most important number in this whole process, 66%. That's the threshold a resolution plan must cross. If lenders controlling 66% of the voting share support a plan, it goes through the Committee of Creditors or COC. If not, it dies there. Now some background over here. Founder Byju and his brother did try to stop the insolvency process. They attempted to settle the original 158 crore rupee dues with the BCCI, the cricket board, which is what triggered the insolvency case in the first place. But at every step, NCLT, the Appellate Tribunal, even the Supreme Court, the message has been the same. The process can only be withdrawn if the COC or Committee of Creditors agrees. And the US lenders on the COC have opposed the settlement, alleging that funds used for it were siphoned off or tainted. Beyond these big financial creditors are hundreds of others, more than 1,700 employees claiming unpaid salaries and about 100 vendors ranging from advertising firms to office suppliers to technology partners. Their claims run into several hundred crores collectively. They won't decide who wins the bid, but the outcome of that decision will determine how much money, if any, they eventually recover. So on one side you have Manipal Group, which already has a major presence in higher education and healthcare. On the other, upGrad, one of India's biggest online learning platforms. Both see strategic value. Both see a chance to expand their footprint, and both know that Byju's assets, especially something like Akash, could transform their business. But this is not simply a corporate auction. It's a process dictated almost entirely by a handful of US lenders who now hold all the cards. Their priority is recovering the maximum amount of money. Their judgment will determine which resolution plan, Manipal's or upGrad's, gets approved. And after the COC votes, the NCLT has only one job to do: to check whether the 66% voting requirement is met and whether the plan complies with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. If both boxes are ticked, the plan becomes binding on creditors, employees, vendors, and even the government. In other words, after years of rapid expansion, big spending, missed filings, and a spectacular fall from a $22 billion peak, the fate of India's biggest Edtech firm now rests not with the founders, not with the investors who once backed it, and not even with the bidders fighting to buy it, but with a small group of US lenders led by GLAS, who will decide what happens next.